So we have to talk about the 5Cs again, because it's been on my mind since our first episode when we talked about Greenlee County and how they're, almost entirely reliant on copper. And I think it's interesting to think about this concept of the 5Cs, which is just so embedded in the culture here in Arizona. And I was wondering, where do the other 5Cs find themselves in the tax base here?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure that we've looked at kind of all 15 counties and what it looks like for ag and for copper today, right? We know about Greenlee because they're a huge outlier, but what does everybody else look like?
I feel like things probably look quite different today than they did before.
This is different from the Wild West Arizona, right? So our 5Cs of climate, copper, cotton, cattle, and citrus might not be the kind of powerhouses that they were in early statehood. So that's what we wanted to get into today, kind of where are the 5Cs in the tax space. So let's get into it. Welcome to Off the Charts, the Creatures of Statute series where we dig into the data and get to tell the stories that most people and most policymakers don't get to see. I'm Vanessa Fielder, joined by Brandon Nee and Zoe Averill. And today, the 5Cs again. The 5Cs help to shape Arizona. So what do they do now in terms of contribution to the overall tax base? Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the old abstract because, fun fact, DOR has not been around since statehood. And the first kind of abstract of the assessment roll, which is just when we compile all of the property tax data across the state, wasn't available until the early 1980s. And so as far as we can go back in kind of our old abstracts is 1980. So when we think about the 5Cs in statehood, it was probably even more relevant back farther than this, but this is as far back as we can go. And for folks that don't dive into property tax data as much, really all this is showing us is the total taxable value of things like mining, which is class 1 in this, and agriculture, which would be 3 of our 5Cs, right? Cotton, cattle, and citrus is in class 4 in these old abstracts. And so what we can see here is that in 1980, agriculture was about $570 million of $7.7 billion in value. So it's a pretty big portion of the tax base, just shy of, 8%?
Yeah, about 8%.
Yeah. And so that was a pretty big deal. If we zoom forward to kind of 1990, that same class 4 made up over 10%. So it was $2.3 billion of what had grown to be $21.7 billion in value. So a pretty big jump in both kind of nominal dollars of value and the share, over 10 years.
It's interesting because you're saying it went up, but from what I can recall looking at our encyclopedia, it doesn't seem like ag is as big a share of our overall tax base today.
Yeah, certainly not on a statewide basis. 10% is a lot higher than I had in my head.
Yeah, me too.
So let me pull up that tool and we can go into this encyclopedia itself.
I like that people are getting to see the process too, that we go through to find data or think about like answering a question with data. You think about the internet and what's available and it's like, oh, data's everywhere. We must just have it until the beginning of time, right? And so here we are, like piecing together different sources and stuff to answer questions. So they're getting to see what we go through when we're trying to build a database and figure out solutions.
For sure. And even in the encyclopedia where we've got like 20 years of data, we can't go back much farther on the property tax side because there was like a major reclassification of property. And so it would be kind of confusing to do more time series analysis. So that's a great point. All right, so I'm pulling up the revenue section of the encyclopedia and let's go over to the property tax page and look at all 15 counties. Okay, so we're interested in ag, right? Kind of on this question of where did the 5Cs go? So class 2 is now agriculture. So let me pull this up. Okay, so now we can see a ton of stuff, right? We can see all of the net assessed value across all 15 counties, kind of how it changes annually. But I think most interestingly, these charts on the right-hand side, which show the 20-year history of the assessed value of agricultural property in each county.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you notice is I'm not used to looking at revenue charts in Arizona that aren't going like up and to the right. So watching a peak happen so very clearly, like early in this 20-year time period, we are capturing the recession. So used to seeing a little trough there, but to have numbers not even come close to recovering is interesting to see.
And these are nominal dollar values, right? So this isn't like the market value of what all of these things are, right? This net assessed value. So there's lots of things that go into this calculation. But in basically every county except maybe 2 or 3, the NAV for ag is down from where it was pre-Great Recession. I mean, just given what we know about net assessed value, kind of its share of the tax base must be a lot less than 2, right?
Yeah, what's the share statewide right now?
Yeah, let me zoom in so we can see this a little bit better. Yeah, good question. So statewide is just 3.6% of all of the taxable property value.
And that's a comparison earlier, right, to the 8 to over
Yes.
10% we were talking about.
Exactly. So it's roughly a third of what it was in 2026 compared to what it was in 1990. That's a big shift, right?
It's interesting to me that, you know, you see Yuma kind of toward the bottom there. What is that? Just over 5% of their total NAV. And you think of Yuma as, you know, a huge agricultural community, right? The majority of the leafy greens are kind of grown there in the wintertime. That's what we hear about all the time. So it's very interesting to me.
Yeah, only 5% of their tax base. There's obviously a couple where it still matters.
Can we look at this single year view back closer to that peak, like that 2008 timeframe?
Yes.
We'd just be curious if that 80 to 90 growth trend continued through the peak we're seeing before degrading.
Okay, so I can pull up 2008. Does that sound right?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, it was way closer to that 10%. So 7.8% of all of the taxable value.
But maybe was even already coming down off that like 10, 11% high.
And it's interesting when we think about agriculture, right? Because it's not just showing up in the property tax base, right? Like economic activity that's attributable to agriculture shows up in, you know, purchasing that ranchers and farmers make on equipment, you know, purchases for food for home consumption. I know that that's not taxed now, but it used to be. And so ag still is a major contributor to our economy in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, great point, right? Like people got to eat. And Arizona farmers and ranchers feed a huge portion of the country. It's just, it doesn't necessarily make up as much of the tax base as it used to. And that's probably more to do with what else has grown in the state, right? Let's look specifically at Maricopa, because I think when we look on a statewide basis, they're going to be the dominators kind of the tax base anyways. And it'll give us a better sense of the statewide trend. And so largely what we can see here is that these orange bars, and to some extent in certain counties, these dark blue bars are the big drivers of the property tax base across the state, kind of regardless of county. The orange bars are basically your house, right? The home that you live in. The blue bars are commercial activity. So that's everything from the big semiconductor facilities that are opening in Maricopa to the, you know, energy generation in Apache County or the mines in Greenlee County. So let me pull up just the multi-year trend. And we can see this on a statewide basis, but we can zoom into a particular county if we want to. But basically, let's just look at class 2 over this time period, and we can see that big drop-off, Brandon, that you were pointing to earlier, that like 2010, 11 peak, when kind of everything was at a height right here, to now declining to that like 3.5% of the tax base. And if we pull that class 3, which is that primary residential, you can see how that's growing as a share of the tax base compared to ag, which was declining.
Yeah, so essentially rooftops are replacing all of that agricultural land.
Yeah, I know the house that I live in now was an old citrus grove, and you can see all of the kind of orange trees or grapefruit trees still all around the neighborhood. The other thing that's kind of grown along with this, and we'll talk about kind of the more commercial replacement, but is also residential rental property. So class 4 is kind of those second homes or apartment complexes, kind of where the person that owns them isn't the occupant. And that's grown massively since kind of the Great Recession.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can just see that share of the red, which is that class 4 we're talking about, grow more and more and more over time, really starting from the recession onward.
And I think there was maybe some like technical reclassification thing that happened around that same time period, but it's not all that, right? Like it's a genuine growth in that class.
But you finally replaced your peak. Like you finally recently have now exceeded with class 4 your total share. Because residential didn't make it up. I mean, it's been growing, but it didn't even exceed that pre-recession peak.
Yeah, great point. And if we look at total net assessed value too, not just the share, We really didn't, if I kind of throw all of the classifications back on here,
Yeah.
we didn't really hit that pre-recession peak of like 75 billion in value until like 2023.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's really striking. What's kind of the reason for that?
Well, the massive housing collapse here, right, was a big part of it. And we have a lot of built-in mechanisms like we talked about on the property tax episode that like slow growth in property values down.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know we're looking at this statewide, but is it possible to limit this just to Maricopa? Because I'd be interested to see how, they shake out and then maybe look at a different county after that.
Yeah, let's look at their kind of growth. Yeah, so that's basically the same chart.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a huge economic engine, right? This region that we're in right now. And you can see that like farm to rooftop, farm to residential rental transition is definitely happening here.
And even the growth in industry as well, that dark blue, which is class 1.
But we know, right, how diverse all of our counties are. So let's, like you suggested, Zoe, grab one of the other ones. And let's do Graham because they're a little similar to Greenlee in that they're becoming a more single industry county, but not quite. And it's been changing a lot over the last couple of years. So I think they might be interesting to look at.
Yeah, they've grown 50% off of their sort of previous peak or from that period that everyone else kind of has a peak.
Yeah, they kind of started from that weaker tax base to begin with and have grown. And it's interesting how kind of their commercial and their residential flip back and forth in terms of like the most important classification. It's a little bit more volatile than it is in Maricopa, right? Which was so dependent on those 3 major categories. This one has, more commercial and more residential, but hardly any rental. And so if we just focus on their class 1 industry, this is kind of what we'd been hypothesizing would start to happen as the county has a larger and larger taxpayer in the mind that's in that community, is that they have a much more volatile kind of value coming out of that. And when the value's going up, it can be great for residential property taxpayers, right? Because it drives the overall rate of the county down. But the flip side of that coin is also true, right?
Yeah, when the price of copper is down or when you're relying on a more volatile industry, how do you make up that lost revenue? Really, you're looking at the property tax.
And for a county like this, which has such a large class 3 contingent of its property tax base, it's a lot harder to jack around the rate, right? They can't go from a $1 rate to a $3 rate to a $1.50 rate right from year to year to respond to the value of copper. Not that any board really wants to do that, but it might be a little bit more straightforward in a single industry county, but kind of balancing the residential interest with the commercial interest in this county is going to be an ongoing challenge that they have moving forward.
Yeah, and these, as you said earlier, so dwarf the other classes. Can you just isolate class 4? Because I think they've had incredible growth, but it just, like you said, doesn't matter because it's so small that if your class 1, class 3 don't perform for some reason, it's not a big enough part of your base to make up the difference, even with, this is pretty incredible, like rental growth.
Yeah, doubling over the last decade. But if we switch this to kind of the share of total NAV, it's still, 5% to 7.5% of the total tax base.
Which is so interesting when we compare that to Maricopa, which we just looked at, right? It's a much larger share in Maricopa than it is in Graham. And so we're seeing that it's not necessarily the same experience statewide. We can't just make a blanket statement to say, rooftops replaced agriculture everywhere across the state. That's certainly not the experience in Graham, even though it might be in Maricopa.
Yeah, different industries have grown in different ways. And so Maricopa's seen a huge high-tech sector, right, move into this region. Graham's seen a mine open, but even though they've both seen large commercial growth, they don't necessarily have the same experience. That diversity, though, across counties is kind of the name of the game in Arizona, right? We don't have a ton of one-size-fits-all approaches that can work given the diversity, right? Like we've got these huge regions with really diverse, multifaceted economies, and then we've got these other regions that have maybe more reliance on a single source or a lot more reliance on the residential property taxpayer. And something we talk about a lot, right, at CSA is there's really only so many levers that counties have to be able to deal with rising costs. And so the property tax is really the only moderately flexible one that they have, which is why we care so much about the tax makeup, because that drives the reality for counties operationally. So all of this that we've gone through today, the property tax base and kind of how the 5Cs do or don't continue to drive local economies, is all available on our website. So dig into the data. It's all at countysupervisors.org/data, and we'll catch you next time on Off the Charts. Thanks for watching.